In today's video, we have all the latest news and rumors around the NHL. Today's rumor mill focusing on teams like Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, lots on the New York Islanders, plus some more details on the David Jiricek trade, what other teams were involved, and how close did things get. We have a couple of items on the NHL waiver wire here today as well, plus several injury updates around the NHL, and one player who was rumored to be a trade candidate might actually be re-signing and staying after all. We'll discuss that and all of today's news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about here today. Let's kick things off first with a couple items here from the NHL waiver wire. The waiver wire today featured one contract termination and one recall with a new signing here, actually. So the Vegas Golden Knights have Daniil Chayka, who's one of their prospects. He's on waivers to terminate the contract. They've mutually agreed that it's best for both parties to part ways. So he's on unconditional waivers to terminate the contract. However, Carolina has signed journeyman veteran goaltender Dustin Tokarski to a one-year, two-way contract, and he requires waivers as well. So obviously, you got Tokarski joins the organization as an extra insurance piece, if you will. He's been in around the NHL for a long time. Had a brief stint with Ottawa on a tryout during training camp, but did not lead to a contract. So he will be under contract with the Hurricanes for the rest of this season. Some updates around the NHL when it comes to injuries and roster changes. The Florida Panthers today recalled goaltender Chris Driedger. Sergei Bobrovsky is going to be away from the club. He and his spouse are expecting an addition to their family, so he will be there and will miss at least one game. They've had to send down Mackie Samoskevich as well to make room on the roster for that transaction to go through. The Calgary Flames today confirmed that young forward Justin Kirkland has been moved to injured reserve as well, and they've recalled Jacob Pelletier, who looks like he's going to get another chance to see if he can stick in the NHL, and Walker Dufour has also been recalled as well. Some updates in Montreal. They've sent back Joshua Waugh to the American Hockey League. There's some that think that there's a good chance that Patrick Laine is ready to return. It will be activated here shortly, so we'll see if that's the conclusion that's accurate or not. Either way, Waugh's heading back to the NHL or AHL. The Red Wings have recalled top prospect goaltender Sebastian Cossa on emergency conditions. Of course, Cam Talbot was injured in their game. Last game here on the weekend, and of course Alex Lyon's still hurt as well, so they do need another goalie. So Cossa will make his jump to the NHL. Hard to say if he'll get into game action or where things stand. Obviously, Ville Husso likely will start, I would suspect, here the next game or two, but you never know. Maybe they'll give Cossa the net. We'll have to wait and see. The Colorado Avalanche today made some moves, juggling some players around. Ross Colton's been moved to long-term injury reserve, so that they could recall some other players, which included Ivan. They also recalled Wagner and Middleton as well. So lots of salary cap hoop jumping, you could say, for the Avalanche here today. Now, some other updates around the NHL. One player who we kind of thought might end up getting traded at some point because he was drawing a lot of attention. Not so much, he wasn't a player that the Jackets were out there shopping, looking to move. But because of the different elements he brings and the unique style, Matthew Olivier was getting a lot of interest from around other clubs. And it sounds like there's a pretty good chance that he's going to remain with the Blue Jackets. He's also a pending unrestricted free agent, which is why there was some speculation about his future. Combine that with the fact that teams are looking for some toughness, looking for, a guy who can do what he does, basically be a true heavyweight, but also, be a fourth-line contributor and play a physical style of game. But the Blue Jackets really value what he brings. And apparently Don Waddell and his representatives have been having contract extension discussions, and it sounds like they might be doing a 3-year contract extension somewhere in that $3.5 million range. So that is probably going to be a lot more than what many other teams would want to consider paying him. Most teams want their fourth line to be, around $1 million or less. Obviously, the Blue Jackets value him. They have a unique cap situation as well. Obviously, they don't have a problem like a lot of teams being, really tight to the cap ceiling. So they can afford to do that. And they have a lot of young players that they want to, protect, and makes sense why they'd be interested in keeping him. And, he was one of those players that I was never 100% sold he was getting moved for sure. It's just that there was lots of interest, and you could see why. There's lots of other teams out there that really value what he brings. It's just that simple. And where he is a pending UFA, you thought, well, the value they could get for this guy might be enough that they can't pass it up. But it sounds like they want to kind of do what you've seen Chicago do with some of the veterans there. Is they, for him to stay and continue on, they may have to overpay, but it sounds like that's what they're willing to do. So at this point, we don't expect Matthew Olivier, unless something goes completely sideways, to end up getting traded. But we have seen the Blue Jackets make some other moves recently. They finally resolved the David Jiricek situation. More details have emerged on how things went down since the trade. I know Elliot Friedman talked about it on his 32 Thoughts podcast this morning, and we've seen some other reports as well. Basically, it sounds like, from what we're hearing, when combining all the different intel out there, is that the Blue Jackets really weren't sold, at least not this current management group, because, again, remember, Don Waddell's very new to the job, so obviously different people were running the organization when Jiricek was drafted a couple of years ago. And as much as he does show a lot of potential, they were not sold on his ability with his skating. And that seems to be the big drawback here, why they're willing to move him. Now, they do have some other interesting prospect defensemen, and, maybe they don't all become Blue Jackets long term, but Jiricek was drafted high enough that a lot of people thought, at the draft at least, that he had potential to be a top pair right shot defenseman. Even if he doesn't completely fulfill that potential and ended up being a top 4 second pair guy, that's still really good long term, right? So clearly, the concerns over his skating seems to be why the Blue Jackets were willing to take their chances and move on. Obviously, they got a pretty good haul of draft picks. Like I said, a great new tool that's available to people in the hockey world, especially after we saw the cap-friendly site go down. Some sites like Puckpedia.com has really upped their game, and I really value their resources that they give us here. And one of their tools on their site is being able to evaluate the value of draft picks. And so you can plug in what draft picks for what team you'd be doing in a trade, and it would tell you what the value is. And it looks like what they've estimated here for the picks that the Blue Jackets got would be like the equivalent of them getting an 8th overall pick. So obviously, they're pretty confident that they can put those picks to use. And if they can get, another player that they feel might not need as much work in that area, maybe they're content. I don't know. Either way, the Blue Jackets are a team that did well, I think, on the trade considering. But at the same time, you don't usually see teams giving up on a right shot defenseman with that much potential that early in their career. So, again, time will tell, but that's what we learned. We also learned that some of the other teams, like the Penguins and the Flyers, were the most interested. I mean, there's other teams in there too, but they are the two of the other team names along, obviously, with where he ended up going to Minnesota, having the biggest interest in the most conversations. It sounds like, from what we're hearing, is that Don Waddell and the Blue Jackets really didn't want to trade him Eastern-bound teams, like in the Eastern Conference. They really wanted to avoid dealing within their own division and preferred to send him west. So yes, the Minnesota Wild gave him a really good offer, but how close were the other teams, we don't know. And it sounds like it wasn't really a preference for them anyway. So again, some behind-the-scenes details on what went down. Jiricek should make his debut at the Wild soon. Obviously, he's going to be given a few chances here to get some practices in, get acclimated with the team before he gets going and makes his plays his first game. So the Blue Jackets are definitely a team to watch. Now, speaking of the Blue Jackets, we're going to stay with them, but jump over to some rumors concerning Vancouver. We know that Nils Höglander of the Canucks has been getting a lot of attention in the rumor mill. Lots of speculation about his future. He's been in Rick Tocchet's doghouse. It seems like they're trying to let him play through it and not completely bench him, take him out of the lineup. That they're still trying to be patient here. And, I think they're taking the approach like, they need to give him some chance to bounce back and get out of the funk he's in. And, maybe it'll allow more opportunity for trade. So the Blue Jackets are another team we can add to the list of teams that we've heard recently that have had interest in the young Canucks forward. Now, Rick Dhaliwal talked about this on one of his recent shows, and he didn't come out and say that anything was imminent. It doesn't say that anything is like, really close or that they're swapping serious offers or nothing like that. But he does mention that he feels the Canucks should be targeting a player like Cole Sillinger in any kind of trade that they do there. So obviously, Cole Sillinger would be a good young player that would make sense for Vancouver to be interested in and ask for. I don't know if Waddell would do that. I'm not sure how he feels about Sillinger and where things are at with all of their pieces and how they feel about their players. But that would be potentially what Vancouver is targeting, at least. Doesn't mean it's going to happen that way. We don't know. We can't say anything is imminent. Just that Hoglander's name is very much out there. So real chance he gets moved in the next few weeks. And if he does, that could be the type of deal we see. It's also possible that they may not get exactly what they want. They hold off and maybe a deal materializes at a later date. But he's definitely a player that everybody should be keeping an eye on, that we could see a deal here sooner than later. Now, the New York Islanders are another team we want to talk about as well. The Islanders are a team that's struggling. They've probably needed a retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, some kind of significant change. For the last couple of years, they haven't gotten it. Lou Lamoriello continues to show his loyalty with his veteran guys and really only tinker around the edges. Outside of Anthony Duclair, there wasn't a whole lot of newness on this team this year. And then Duclair came down with a pretty serious injury early on, which is really unfortunate. But this team needs more speed, it needs more youth, it needs a change. They're not getting it. You can tell that with the comments coming out of Patrick Waugh lately, some of the things he said a couple of times, it sounded like he was kind of throwing Lou under the bus here, so to speak. I do have serious concerns over how their relationship really is, and I do wonder if Waugh stays on or if he, talks to ownership, and if there's no change and Lou remains at the helm there, does he want to stick around? I kind of wonder with that. They continue to healthy scratch Pierre Engvall, which is completely justified. It's a long-term contract that should have probably never been given out. But it's a real possibility that we see the Islanders kind of become sellers later in the season. Right now, it's not looking like things are going to turn around. You never know, though. And they have some interesting veterans on expiring deals, like Brock Nelson, like Kyle Palmieri, to name a couple. Even Anders Lee, captain. He's another player to watch. I believe he's got 2. I have to check Puckpedia, but I'm pretty sure he's got 2 years on his contract. But he's a player I'd look forward to. All 3 of those forwards, there's going to be interest. Now, one name to watch, Brock Nelson, to me, should generate a good return. We've heard about Kyle Palmieri maybe being linked to where he came from, and that's New Jersey. Now, he's been on Long Island some time, but he could be a player that doesn't have to go too far and maybe head back to where he started to join the Devils later in the year. So we've heard that. We'll see if that comes true. Brock Nelson has been linked to a number of teams. We've heard about the interest before from Toronto. We can't really say how serious that is, but there's, does he make sense for them? He would. But another team to watch is Vancouver. Again, apparently I've learned that last year the Vancouver Canucks tried to trade for Brock Nelson. Unsuccessfully, obviously, but they were interested in him before. I assume this was around the time or before they traded for Elias Lindholm. Obviously, the Nelson trade wasn't coming together. They changed their target. I don't know that Lindholm, to me, he was a good fit there in Vancouver, but to me, almost like he was playing too low in the lineup. But now in Boston, it's almost like he's too high. It's like he needs something in between. Great number 2. But in Vancouver, he was a 3. In Boston, he's a 1. It's a big difference in what the expectations are. So with all these names out there, like I said, Vancouver now is a possibility, a team that could be linked to Brock Nelson. So obviously, we know Vancouver likely will try to add on the blue line and down the middle sometime before the deadline. And it just makes sense that these could be some players that they look at. Like Nelson is a prime target. Palmieri, I think, would fit well with the Devils if that happens. Anders Lee is hard to say, right? And there could be others, too. They're not the only names on Long Island that would make sense to maybe consider swapping out. But I do think it's a real possibility that this might finally be the year that we see a bit of a sell-off and be, a bit of a turnover and get some, a bit of a retool going there because it's badly needed in the worst way. And, I do have to think that it's possible that Lou is done as well. But again, that's tough to say as well. Just because, that it seems like he never wants to leave. And I'm not confident that ownership sees him as being the problem. But I think they need a new leader there to restructure this roster. Otherwise, they're going to be middle of the pack at best, and it's just not going to, you're not really moving the needle. You get a new arena, the attendance is falling. You have to address it, and hopefully the ownership there sees that. Now, a couple of the teams to look at, both in Ontario, Ottawa, and Toronto. In Ottawa, I know there's obviously a lot of talk about some of the types of players we've talked about it here recently that they could be looking for. They come back from a California road trip with a 1-1-1 record through those three teams. Normally, that wouldn't be that bad. They had a 3-game road trip where you come home with a 500 record. Okay, it's not horrible. It really isn't. And I do think to some degree, some Sens fans might be overreacting here. It's just a case of the other games leading up to that. They've had a few, I'd say probably 3 or 4, maybe 4 to 5 games that they should have won and they didn't. And they're not as high in the standings as we think they should have been. And I think some fans are overreacting because of that, because, it is hard to get caught up. But I do think the fact that they get out of Anaheim last night with 1 point, and they've got a good 4-game homestand coming up against teams that theoretically they should be able to win. Like, it's not too late but they do need to get it turned around quick. Absolutely. Now, we've heard about possibly adding a power forward, a middle six defensive, like two-way forward, and then a defenseman, preferably a right shot, but I don't think they're opposed to a lefty, if they're somebody who's going to move the needle and really stabilize things. And apparently Cam Fowler of the Ducks, who's currently injured, by the way, is a name that they've had their eye on, according to Bruce Garriock. Now, we know that Fowler has a lot of trade protection, but was willing to open up that list to work with them to get moved to a whole bunch of different locations that he was supposedly going to be flexible with. We have no idea how he feels about Ottawa. We have no idea if really how serious that is either. I mean, you could make an argument that, he might be a good fit there, but the problem is you've got, he's for what he makes, you'd have to ideally want to play him top 4 minutes, and he's not really the ideal candidate. I mean, somebody's going to probably end up playing on their offside. We don't know how long Artem Zub is going to be out. It just really complicates things. So, and he comes with, a couple of years on his deal. So, I mean, he could be an option. I just don't know that it's a perfect fit there, but we'll see as we get closer here to the next couple of weeks. I suspect that depending on how results go, we'll determine what kind of moves we see. But even if Ottawa can string together a few wins here on this next homestand and things look a little bit better and they're kind of back in the race, I still think they need to address the blue line. With Zub being out, they've got too much exposure back there between the two youngsters with Clevin and JBD are in over their heads right now. They started off strong, and now it's like they get caved in a lot. I just think that they can hit. There's just too much more that they can handle. And then you got Hamonic, who is a bit of a anchor back there as well. Like, you've really only got 3 out of your 6 defensemen with Chabot, Jensen, and Sanderson, really capable. And Sanderson isn't having his best season. He's having a little bit of a sophomore slump here. Jake Sanderson really should have, he's not as good as he was last year. I'm not really sure why, and it could be who he's partnered with and paired with, but at the end of the day, they need some help on that blue line, because they're looking at the goals they give up on this road trip, you're just shaking your head. Absolutely shaking your head. But defensively, looking at a lot of the top, analytics, they're really actually not bad defensively. But it's what they are giving up is a few more high danger chances per game, which is making it really difficult on the goaltenders. So we'll see. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is the Maple Leafs. Jeff Merrick, of course, formerly of Sportsnet, had a long absence all summer and into the early part of the fall. In case you're not aware, Jeff Merrick is back officially, back in the media world, media landscape, has a new show. So he's connected with the Nation Network, which is who owns Daily Faceoff. So he's got a show through the Daily Faceoff platform called The Sheet. It is daily. It's in the podcast format as well. His same sort of thing that you used to see with his radio show with Sportsnet And, of course, same idea what he did with Elliott with 32 Thoughts. You know, he's going to be talking a lot about all the news and rumors, and you're going to have some guests and interviews, and, you know, basically the same sort of concept, except he's going to have a little bit more creative freedom to do some of the things that he likes to do, which is great as well. But one thing he talked about in his show just launched today, in the first episode, he was talking about how he really thinks that the Maple Leafs need to have a real serious conversation about considering going after Nazem Kadri before the trade deadline. Now, of course, if the Flames continue to play well, and I think if they feel they're going to make the playoffs, they're not going to want to move out anybody of significance. So, obviously, the Flames' success or lack thereof will play a role if any team is really going to have any chance to pry Naz out of Calgary. But with a reunion back in Toronto to have him, because they clearly have a hole down the middle. And you imagine adding Kadri would be an element they haven't had in a while. And ever since they moved him, is one of those, I know they felt like they couldn't trust him. He kept getting suspended in the playoffs. He was he was a hothead. He was defending his teammates. His heart was in the right place, but it was an overreaction. And that's kind of what, led the organization to feeling that they couldn't trust him when it mattered most in the big games, and they had to move on. But look at what he's done since he's left there. And they do have a big hole on the center spots here. He would be now. Don't get me wrong. A Kadri trade to Toronto would be very complicated given his cap situation as well. I'm not sure how they'd pull it off, but would he be perfect in a lot of ways? Yes, but again, complicated nonetheless. But leave it to Merrick to come up with a interesting trade idea to kick off his brand new show as a discussion point here. But to me, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's just really, really complicated. Like I said, you get the cap situation. You've got the Flames record, and if et cetera, are they going to go to the playoffs and all that to take a look at? So I don't know. As time goes on, they're definitely going to be looking to add down the middle. I do think Brock Nelson's another name we talked about today, maybe having interest for the Canucks. He could be of interest there too. He makes sense. So we'll see what happens. But does Nazem Kadri to Toronto make sense for you? Does Jeff Merrick have a point? And let me know if you've configured a way for that to work. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.